Hello, this is Mr. Smith, and this is Honors Economics with a daily participation. Please make sure you click on Resubmit and type in 3 most significant things from today's lesson. So quickly today, and this won't take a long time because this is actually just pure informational. It's not theoretical. It's about basic facts and categorization of different types of businesses, and this involves some legality because obviously states have the ability to decide what type of business licenses exist and so on. But for the most part, it's pretty much straightforward facts. There isn't a lot of difference between, what we can learn about this at the 3 different levels: general, academic, and honors. It's just pretty much these are the 3 types of businesses and how we define them, and the advantages and disadvantages that happen because of them. And if you've taken entrepreneurship or some other type of business class, maybe you're already familiar with some of this material. And so today we'll be talking about the 3 basic types. Tomorrow we'll talk about some of the special types of businesses because there's some other ones that aren't here on the screen. I'll talk more about LLPs and LLCs and S corporations and franchises. I'll talk about those tomorrow. But for today, we just want to talk about the 3 basic types. Sole proprietorships, as obvious from the word sole, is when there is one person that owns a firm. And this one person establishes this business on paperwork of a business license and a business number and so on, but they and the business are one and the same. So it's not a separate entity. And so they and the business are one and the same. Because of that, and because there's a simple amount of paperwork involved, a sole proprietorship is the easiest compared to the other 2 to establish. That doesn't mean it lacks difficulty. It's not challenging. It just means that it is simpler than the others. And that is incredibly true when it comes to its taxes, because here's how that works. If you have a full-time job and you make $40,000 a year, and on the weekends you have this sole proprietorship, which is a cleaning business where you make an additional $10,000 a year, then your total income, your total personal income, is $50,000. You and the business are one and the same, so this counts as part of your income. And then if you spent $2,000 on expenses, then you would also deduct, because you're allowed to deduct business expenses, $2,000 from your personal income taxes. So, in other words, no separate set of taxes, no second set of taxes that you would have to pay for this business. It's you and the business are one and the same. So what is great about this business? Well, its simplicity is one. Second would be the fact that you have full control. You get to make all decisions. You don't have to deal with anyone else. Third is that you keep all of the profits. And fourth, you have a lot of flexibility when it comes to creativity and when this business is or isn't opened up. We talked in the previous lessons about when a business, when it should produce up to, when should it stop, when it reaches the point where marginal cost equals marginal revenue and all those other kinds of things. And it should be a simple mathematical type of decision, but as I pointed out in the past, we don't have all the information about marginal costs and average total costs and so on until maybe after the fact. So the decision might be delayed. And what often makes it even more complex is when you have to discuss it with other people. But in the case of sole proprietorship, you make that decision by yourself. What are some disadvantages? Well, you have limited managerial experience. Even if you are the best darn manager in the world, and the maximum amount of managerial experience and wisdom that a person could have, let's say if we can measure in units, was 100 units. That's it. That's all you have. There is no other person involved. Even if another person had, 15 additional units or 15 years or 15 little theories of business, they are not with you. So you have limited managerial experience. It's only based on yourself. Doing that means you also have limited time. A lot of businesses, especially when they're first starting out, the manager/owner should be there. And so you're not going to want to work 20-hour days if the business could remain that open. For instance, maybe it opens up at 8 and doesn't close, till midnight, or opens at 6 and, some kind of ridiculous hours. Are you going to do that? And of course, the answer is no. You're not going to want to stay open 7 days a week. Local restaurants, the owner gets a little bit older, so they want to spend more time with their family, so they decide not to open on Wednesday. They don't want to have one of their employees run it on one of those, the day that they decide to shut down for some odd reason, but they decide to close, and so that's their decision. And that's because they just don't have enough time to enjoy both this workplace and their leisure, especially if they want to remain in full control, like I said, and they don't want to hire somebody else to help run it. Next of all would be limited resources, and this includes money. If it's just you going to the bank to get a loan, what if you have bad credit? Or if it's just you, there's obviously going to be a limit on how much you can borrow. You only have your own savings that can go into this. And not only that, but you only have so much time and effort to get to know people and to hire people and have contacts to where you could go to find pools of unemployed people and people willing to switch their jobs. And so you are also limited in your employee resources as well. And probably the biggest one is unlimited liability. You are libelous for everything that happens. Something you do wrong, something an employee does wrong, something faulty with a product, some kind of accident with a vehicle owned by the company. All of that you are personally liable for. And if you don't have good enough insurance, there's a possibility that people might come after your personal finances or property as well. So that's a problem, especially if you're running the business from your own home. You are incredibly liable. And another one that I just like to mention is, this is something a lot of people don't think about, when you pass away, the business ceases to exist as a lack of permanence. You can certainly pass along the assets through your estate to someone else, but once you pass away, this business ceases to exist. Next one would be partnership. I'm just going to talk about this from the general partnership perspective. There is just basically a limited partnership, and an LLP would, of course, be the limited liability partnership. I just want to talk about it from a general perspective. A general partnership is when you have two or more people, and it could be 3, it could be 100, it could be 1,000, if you want to make it that complex, that come together to form a business and divide up the responsibilities and profits. And that can be divided up, for instance, 2 people, 2 ways. It could be 50-50, or they can decide a different portion of that amount, maybe 60-40. Maybe this person manages 6 out of every 10 days, and that person 4 out of every 10 days. So they only get this profit. Or maybe this person had 60% of the savings to put in to the business originally, and maybe this person only had 40%. So whatever the reasonings are, and of course this has to be documented, which just from that step, of course, makes it more complicated than a sole proprietorship. And so that's one of its cons. Let's look at the cons first. More complicated. You have to have an agreement. Obviously, with that, there is going to be disagreement, not only with the original agreement, but also with every decision that's made after that. And that's, of course, the one biggest problem when 2 humans are interacting with each other, whether they're parent and child or siblings, boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife, business partners. They are going to have a disagreement at some point. And the question is, are they going to let that interfere with the running of the business? And often that does happen. And sometimes businesses shut down just because people couldn't agree anymore. Then you are partially liable. So you're liable, and I don't mean the fact that you are, you can look forward to the fact that, if the company owes money in a lawsuit, you only owe 60%. The other person has to carry out the other 40, for instance. It also means as if the other person on their, 4 days of managing during a 10-day period, if they make some kind of really terrible decision, ends up costing the company, closing it, getting it into a lawsuit, you still are liable for that person's decisions. And so you are protected somewhat based on the partnership agreement. You won't share the entire liability, but you still have liability. And now, worse than the sole proprietorship, in this circumstance, you're responsible for someone else's bad decisions, including the management decisions. And lack of permanence is another one, because even if you have 10 partners and one of them dies, technically the document, of course, doesn't apply. This has to be reformed as a new business for the future. And looking at some of the pros, obviously you can divide up the management. You can divide up the responsibilities. You have access to more resources. You know more people. You have different gifts. One of you is better at bookwork. One of you is better at people. You have more managerial experience because there are now at least two of you or more. You have more access to financial resources because the two of you are more likely to get a bigger loan, or at least one of you has better credit, or one of those types of situations. So there are a variety of reasons, mostly access to resources and the fact that you can split things up is why a partnership is a good thing. And one con I didn't mention, of course, is an obvious one, is that you have to split up the profit. So maybe you're both working really hard, but you're the only one that seems to come up with ideas, or you're the only one that seems to interact with customers. This other person is working hard and they're putting forth energy, but there's always going to be misperception in that split, 60-40, 50-50, 70-30, or whatever it is, about how fair it is. And that, as we've discussed in the past at some points, the idea of justice or fairness or those kinds of things are a total matter of interpretation. The last one I want to mention is corporation. And a corporation is an separate entity that exists apart from its owners. So a group of people, shareholders or stockholders, get together and they form a business, and really it's usually just a couple people and they get other investors to come along. But they form a corporation, and it is a business that has articles of incorporation, actually documents that have to be submitted to the government, and it sets up a purpose for this entity, its mission, its location, the products that it might be involved with, and so on, in its structure. And this corporation, because it's a separate entity, will shield the owners from liability to a great extent. So what are the stockholders or shareholders liable for? Only for what they invested. So if you originally put in an investment of 10 grand and this corporation gets sued successfully for 10 million, all you owe is the 10, and you don't even owe it because you've already given the money in the original investment of this corporation. So this 10 grand that you invested is gone. But it really already was gone because you invested it and you didn't have any intention of pulling it out. So really, it's just that original investment, nothing else, nothing more, nothing additional. And even the person who originally came up with the idea, all the people are protected that are owners. So this means it provides this incredible legal liability protection that makes owners have a lot safer investment to put in. They invest in a partnership or sole proprietors that might be involved with something dangerous, some kind of complex machinery or sending drivers across the country, possibility of accidental death and so on. That can get into some libelous type of activity where the investors might have to testify in court or be drawn into a long, drawn-out battle between lawyers over who owes what. But with a corporation, those kind of situations are eliminated. Then the corporation, one of its benefits besides this extremely limited liability, is the corporation also, because of its structure, has management, and because of all these investments, and the fact that you have a pool of people investing, hopefully, you are going to be able to hire incredible managers with lots of managerial experience. So corporations are likely to have the most management experience. It isn't necessarily true 100% of the time, but it is true more of the time than not. And then the corporations also have many different ways of gathering investments. The original purchase of stock, corporate bonds, actually selling its products, buying and selling property, because corporations can do a lot of things that individuals can do. Enter and exit from contracts, buy and sell property, and so on, sue and be sued. And so the corporation can have a variety of ways besides just selling its product to make money. It's a broad financial assets as well, numerous resources. The downsides is that as an owner, you definitely don't have any control, except that you get to vote based on the number of shares you have for the board of directors, which selects the management team. So if your corporation goes public, which means you're posted for sale a certain number of shares of your investment to the public on an exchange like the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ, then other people can buy shares or portions of ownership in your company. And then in turn, those shares that are sold can gather more money. When the company goes public, it typically makes hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, maybe even billions. However, when you do that, the more people you have, the less control even for the vote of the board of directors that you have. So if you originally, each of your 10 partners have 10,000 shares, you have 10,000 votes for the board of directors like anybody else. But if you all agree to sell almost all of your shares, let's say 90%, so you go public, you sell, you had 10,000 shares each, so you sell 9,000, you keep 1,000. Now there could be 9,000 other people that just bought your shares alone, and people could have bought all the other ones. So now you have to share this corporation with all these other people. You definitely split the profits. You're not guaranteed to get profits all the time, because corporations, when they share their profits with the shareholders, it's called a dividend, but they don't always pay out dividends. And then on top of that, it's obviously incredibly complex. It's incredibly complex, a lot of paperwork, a lot of legal documentation. You go public especially, and you're involved with the Securities and Exchange Commission, or SEC, which makes sure that, the manager, the CEO, the chief executive officer of this corporation isn't calling up individuals and saying, well, we have this really new hot product coming out next week, so you need to go in and buy up as much stock right now. Sharing that kind of information is known as insider trading, and there's a bunch of other charges that can go along with that and other complications. So obviously the law is more complex when it is involved with this last of the three type of major business organizations. These are three of the big ones. We'll talk about the other ones in the next lesson. And any of the market structures, obviously the bigger, more expensive ones to get into and maintain, to enter and to exit from, like oligopolies or monopolies, are more likely to involve corporations, but they don't have to. They could be sole proprietorships. Sole proprietorships are more likely to have the perfectly competitive market end of the spectrum, but that doesn't have to be that way. That's not necessarily true. And so you do have some commonalities and some statistical probability that is more likely with market structure linking up with certain types of business organizations, but it isn't necessarily true all the time. And just one other thing that I'd like to mention. Sole proprietorships are extremely popular, which is why perfectly competitive marketplaces have many, many producers. Sole proprietorships are many of them. So it's not a surprise that sole proprietorships are probably more likely to be in an industry that is close to perfectly competitive. But they make up 75% of the businesses, but they make up less than 10%, probably even less than 5% of the total productivity, either by goods or measured by income in the United States. Corporations, however, make up a much smaller percent of the population or number of the firms, but they make up most of the productivity that occurs. So the sole proprietorships are popular. Lots of people are involved in it. But for two reasons, they aren't as productive or financially worthy as you might think. And the reason is because, first of all, one is that they're more likely to be in a perfectly competitive marketplace, which, remember, they're price takers. They don't make a lot of profit. And another reason why is because they're small. Because of their lack of resources, they're small. And they don't have a lot of infrastructure or ability to churn out lots of products. In most cases. It isn't true 100% of the time, but statistically speaking, it's more likely to be that way.